Good afternoon. I now call to order the Board of Education Policy Review Committee meeting for November. Today, November 16th, 2020, Baltimore County Public Schools and offices continue to be closed to the public and non-essential personnel in order to maintain the health and safety of our students and staff. In accordance with the Board of Education's amended resolution approved at the October 11th, 2020 board meeting, in the event of a medical or health emergency related to COVID-19, the board chair, in consultation with the vice chair and the superintendent, may declare that a board meeting or a board committee meeting be held remotely in its entirety without the physical presence of board members, or in a hybrid manner with only some individual board members participating remotely, subject to the establishment of a mechanism that would allow each board member the opportunity to fully participate in the meeting, despite not being physically present, and that would allow the public to also remotely attend those portions of the meeting that are open pursuant to the Opens Meetings Act, by being able to listen and or view those portions of the meeting. As a result, today's Policy Review Committee meeting will be held virtually and broadcasted through live stream on the BCPS website. In order to efficiently conduct the meeting, all voting items this afternoon will be done by a roll call vote. Board members will say their names before making and seconding a motion as applicable, as well as when requesting discussion on an agenda item. Additionally, as a courtesy to the committee, I ask that you inform Ms. Clark or Ms. Howie if you must leave the call by using the Teams chat feature so that a quorum can be maintained. Ms. Clark, please call the roll to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Yes, Mr. Mahomza. Mr. Offerman?
Present.
Ms. Rowe?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Ms. Causey?
Here.
Thank you.
There's now a quorum of the board. Ms. Clark, please call the roll of staff members that are participating in today's meeting.
Dr. Adams?
Present.
Mr. Dixit?
Present.
Dr. McComas?
Present.
Dr. Scriven?
Present.
Ms. Howie?
And I see Ms. Shea here as well, Ms. Clark.
Mr. Coles? Ms. Shea?
Present.
Mr. Plate?
Present.
Thank you.
Barbara Burnoff is also here.
Thanks, Barb. Anybody else that I missed? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. The live video footage of the October 19th, 2020 meeting represents the minutes of the meeting. The minutes stand approved as recorded. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business, policy 8311 meetings, and for that we call on Ms. Howie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee and colleagues. 8311 has not changed since the October 19th, 2020 meeting. There have been no changes made by staff. We did, however, provide to the members of the committee a link to the appendix to Robert's Rules of Order, the 12th edition, so that you would have the full text of the special rules for electronic meetings. I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. So board members, you may go ahead and raise your hands and I will call board members in the order that I see the hands. Ms. Scott?
Yes, hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
ma'am.
Okay, great, sorry about that. Yes, I was looking at policy 8311, and if I had something that I'd like to change or word to add or anything like that, would I need to make a motion or could I just offer my suggestions here?
So the process has been in the past that they've been moved by members by the committee because it's the action of the committee. However, we're a small assembly, so certainly things can be done less formally. I would leave that to the discretion of the chair.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Howie. So, Ms. Scott, I would just say that the practice and Robert's Rules of Order would have us continue with that, which is to have discussion, but then if you want to make a motion to add specific language, it's proper to do that, and then you can get a second, and then there could be any further discussion, or the committee could just vote on it.
Okay, certainly then. Then I would like to make a motion that on page 2 of 5, under individual board members, item A, where it says the board members shall obtain the permission of the board or committee chair prior to electing participation by telephonic or electronic means, to change obtain to notify the board or committee chair of their participation by telephonic or electronic means.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Where were you exactly?
Sorry, so my motion is pertaining to page 2 of the appendix.
The appendix?
Yes, ma'am, of the appendix. A. So it's still under individual board members may participate electronically. It's item A. And I wanted to change shall obtain to notify. I can read the way it exists right now again, and then.
No, I see you're at line 6, ma'am.
So on page, there's page 1, and it says special rules for electronic meetings. And I scroll down, and on mine, when I click on it, it says page 2 of 5.
Yes, ma'am. I have where you are. And that would be, actually, that's line 5, but understood.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
No question. No problem.
So I'll read it again, maybe.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Just point of clarification, Ms. Causey. Should I read it again? I don't know if I want to make sure everybody is following.
Sure.
Okay. So right now, the way it's written, it says the board members shall obtain the permission of the board or committee chair prior to electing participation by telephonic or electronic means. So my motion is to change the word shall obtain to notify the board or committee chair of the board member's decision to participate by telephonic or electronic means.
So if I may, Ms. Scott, the motion would read that you move to amend line 6 of page 2 by striking out obtain the permission of and substituting the word notify.
Yes, that would be correct. Thank you for rephrasing it like that.
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Offerman.
Thank you. Ms. Scott, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. I think that it's appropriate to notify the committee chair or the board chair whether or not you can participate by phone or electronic means, or if that's what your preference is. I feel that it's a little heavy-handed to require board members to obtain permission of the board chair or committee chair because they may have their own kinds of things going on and may have to participate electronically. But I think it's appropriate to notify.
Other board members? I saw hands up, but I'm not sure if that relates to this motion. So if board members want to speak to this motion, just go ahead and state your name and speak to the motion.
Lily Rowe.
Yes, Ms. Rowe.
So I guess my only question is, I thought that one of the reasons for obtaining permission was because of the technical aspects and the fact that the policy is not necessarily going to allow someone to participate electronically under every single circumstance at their own discretion, but that this is for some sort of extreme situation for COVID and other types of things. So I guess I'm confused as to maybe there should be a time frame. Like, what if someone says, I'm going to attend electronically, and they've given the board chair 15 minutes notice, and it's not technologically possible to do that. So I could see some problems with this.
Okay, did you want a response, or those are just your thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of times it's not heavy-handed to seek the chair's permission for something. We have to seek the chair's permission every time we speak. So to me, it just seems like this is one more of those things, because the chair has to coordinate all of the electronic attendance, that seeking the chair's permission, obviously no chair should deny permission if it's possible to grant it and aligned with the policy. But I guess I could see problems if it's simply to notify, because what does that mean exactly?
So was that a question for me to respond to, or are we going to go through the other people with their hands raised?
Those are just my comments. I don't know that there's a question.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rowe. The next, I see we have two new committee members that have joined us. Good afternoon, Ms. Pasteur and Mr. Mahumza. So anyone else that wants to speak to this motion can, actually what I'll do, since we have two new members attending, if Ms. Howie, would you just repeat the motion that's on the floor, please?
Sure. The motion was to amend policy 8311 at line 6 of the appendix by striking out the words obtain the permission of, and that's at line 5, and substituting notify. So if amended, the language would read, the board member shall notify the board or committee chair prior to electing participation by telephonic or electronic means.
Thank you. So board members, Ms. Rowe has spoken to it, and other board members that want to speak to it can just state their name and speak to it.
Good afternoon. This is Ms. Pasteur. I would just want to piggyback or to address what Ms. Rowe was saying. Her question was around the word permission. And certainly I'm throwing in that permission is still not applicable here, because understandably, as Ms. Rowe pointed out, that if you call a few minutes before, and we're talking about the technology that goes with the request, that technology would not necessarily be available if you are looking at a situation beyond COVID where we're making it available. So it is not that you're requesting permission, you're simply saying, I will not be able to come live. I would like to do it virtually or whatever. And then the simple answer is, because we have not had prior notice, we don't have the capability of supporting that technologically. And so that is very different than asking permission. You're just saying, this is what I'd like to do. And the answer is, well, no, you can't do it, because we don't have that technology to do that. Because once we are out of this situation, I would imagine that the same things that are happening to help us do it now virtually won't be in play without much notice to that end. So I think maybe what you need to do or process or make sure that board members understand is that there's some time frame involved in this, because it does take time to have Mr. Corns or people in his department to do this. This is not something you just would anymore just be able to turn your computer on and like magic, it happens. So I don't see it as a matter of the permission, it's a matter of the timeliness at which the member apprises the chair or board chair, the committee chair, that they are unable to come for a good reason and have the time for the technology to be hooked up. Long way around. But that is just hopefully to give Ms. Rowe just a little bit, a different thought on why it's still not permission, it's just information. Thank you.
You're muted, Ms. Causey.
Our favorite phrases. Mr. Offerman, did you have your hand up to speak?
Not for this issue.
Okay, thank you. Other board members to comment on this? Okay, since every other board member has gone, I will make a comment. So, Ms. Howie, in the policy itself on page 2, line 17, it says in-person meetings are expected and a quorum of the board should be physically present in one location for public meetings when reasonably possible. However, the board may find it necessary to meet electronically without the physical presence of a quorum in one location. So I would see one of the reasons to either obtain the board chair approval or have significant notification is to make sure that in those cases, as Ms. Pasteur said, we will get beyond COVID. And in complying with that piece of the policy, it would be important for the board chair and also the board executive assistant to understand that there's going to be a quorum present. So, and it may be if other board members have gotten, have already gotten permission or given notice, there may not be enough. You know, it may no longer be possible for someone to meet to meet electronically. So I think there has to be some mechanism where those things are taken into consideration. What Ms. Rowe said, the technology, but also this aspect of a quorum. And I'm open to the language, but I think it does need to be clear who the person is and what's required.
And I'm sorry, when you say who the person is, to whom are you referring?
Well, so in the appendix, it says the board chair. Mm-hmm. So because the board chair is responsible for making sure there's a quorum and presiding over the meetings and.
My motion, excuse me, this is Ms. Scott. My motion didn't change that. It just said, it just changed, instead of getting permission from the board chair or committee chair, it said to notify. That's it. And if I may, the points that were brought up about technology and quorum, and those would still be issues regardless. I just feel that it's heavy-handed to seek permission when we're all adults. I think it's appropriate to notify.
Okay, any other comments?
Ms. Causey?
Yes, Ms. Rowe.
It seems to me in the very technical language of Robert's Rules of Order that if it's possible for someone to notify the chair and for the chair to say no, that is in essence seeking approval or permission. But if permission is heavy-handed, maybe the word approval would be better. Because the word notify suggests that once notified, the chair has to comply and cannot say no. And I don't think that's what we want.
Ms. Howie, do you see a distinction legally between approval and permission?
Legally, between approval and permission. If I'm getting permission, then I'm also receiving approval. I see them as synonymous.
Okay, thank you.
But
That's how I view it. Obviously, Ms. Rowe viewed the language differently. So there may be another way that Ms. Rowe is interpreting those two words.
Well, no, I see approval and permission as being synonymous. Approval just sounds less patronizing than permission, but I don't think that notification and obtaining approval are the same thing. Do you see there being a difference parliamentary wise as being, because I think that it's important in this circumstances, given that the chair does have to run the meeting and with a quorum and other things, if it's possible that the chair could say no, then the language needs to reflect the reality of what's happening. And if it's possible for the chair to say no for some reason, the chair may have very reasonable reasons for saying no, but that is seeking approval. It is not notification. And I don't know that if we say notification, are we saying that the chair must comply and cannot say no? Ms. Howie, what's your interpretation of that as far as a parliamentarian type thing?
I don't think that's a parliamentary issue. What notice is. If you look at notice as a parliamentary matter, notice of meetings, calls of meetings, that's how notice is usually defined within RONR. I don't think within this context that there is a standard meaning or understanding in RONR.
So if we say that someone has to provide notice to the chair, does that leave open the possibility that the chair can say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that?
So I think the job of this committee is to discuss how the language should be applied and what you believe the best way operationally for this language to be used. So if the committee, when the committee takes this forward to the full board, obviously there'll be discussion at the full board, but to the extent that this is legislative history, sort of what Congress and the legislature, the General Assembly do, then that's what's happening now, that you all would decide at this point what the meaning is that you attach to the words as you amend them.
Ms. Causey, this is Ms. Pastor. May I ask Ms. Howie a question?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Howie, it was my understanding, so help me if I'm incorrect, that if you have a person who is not going to be physically at a meeting, and I'm only speaking about meetings after everyone is back, okay? And a person is not able to attend a meeting and they want to participate. I would hate for a person not to be allowed, especially at a full board meeting, if they want to, but they just physically can't come for a really good reason that they would have, and they are adults, and so they would know what that would be. But in light of that, it was my understanding that the public, if it's open, the public would have to be able to hear the person, especially if the person is participating in a discussion, et cetera. Is that much correct?
So first of all, this section is only about hybrid meetings. This section is about when individual board members cannot attend a face-to-face meeting. So that's what this addresses.
So the public would need to be able to hear that person.
Absolutely.
So my previous comments had to do with, and the technology in my mind is important to this. This is not asking, I agree those two terms might be synonymous, but this is about not whether you can say, yeah, I'm not coming, and then the board chair or whomever says, well, no, you have to be here or you can't come on. No, I'm thinking, unless I don't understand what we're doing here or what you're doing there, is that it is, as you described, this is about doing this in a hybrid manner. So the choice about whether I can physically attend or I need to be virtual, that's a given. You're simply saying to the chair, I won't be able to be there physically, but I will be there virtually. That is a notification. That is not whether you're saying approval or permission. So then it is just saying up to the person, whoever the chair is, to say, okay. And if that person can get on and there's that technology, then they would be on. I'm a little lost as to what the issue is. Either you notify the person because that's professional and that's a courtesy. And I don't understand. So can somebody explain if I'm missing something? I don't know
Ms.
where
Casher,
the issue is.
so the thing that you're missing is
Excuse me,
that,
Ms. Rowe. She did initially direct that to Ms. Howie. So if I could give Ms. Howie the opportunity to
And
respond.
if I understand the question, it's whether or not this language would prohibit an individual from participating because the individual is seeking permission and not providing notice. Was that a question, ma'am?
I suppose if the person wants to participate, if the person must rely on someone else to give approval or permission, now you call into question, in my mind, whether that person can be a part of the meeting or not. But notification says that I am, as a part of my professionalism, I am letting you know I can't come in person, but I will be a part of the meeting, but it will be virtually. I'm just apprising you of that so you won't see you will know why you don't see my body in the flesh, but I am here. And that's how I see it. That's how I see the professionalism of it. It is about notification, not approval or permission.
Understood. So I don't believe there was a question for me.
so I just wanted to point out to Ms.
There
Casher.
was, no, excuse me. There was, and you answered it. And I just did my own follow-up response to that. But there was a question to you because I wanted to know legally that is within our purview to be able to do.
Ms. Thompson?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Howie, and then.
And I just want to make sure I'm answering or responding to the question that was posed. If the question is whether or not the board chair or committee chair can prevent an individual from participating, another board member from participating, then I think the standard that would be used, that's used in most cases involving local boards of education, is arbitrary, unreasonable, illegal. Did the board chair exercise that authority in an arbitrary, unreasonable, or illegal fashion to prevent another board member, a sitting board member, from participating? So what was the manner in which, what was the reason for which the denial was issued? And that would be a question of fact based on the individual case. So, but if your question is whether or not they can do it, people generally do what they want to do. The question is whether or not
we can all do what we want to do. That's why I started with legally, and that's why I addressed it to you. We can all do a whole bunch of things, whether it's right or wrong or legal or illegal. But I would not want I don't know why any chair would want to have that weight and go through that legality. If what you're saying is that legally you open Pandora's box by telling a board member, no, you can't participate in the meeting.
If it is done arbitrarily, unreasonably, or illegally.
Yes, but then you get into the question, but someone else, unless you're going to put out there why it is your business, why you can't come. Then when person B comes up and makes the same request and it is granted, then you have another issue. Why go through that? Why do that? We are adults. Why do that? Just make sure that the person is being responsible and notifies the chair. that piece is my opinion. Thank you.
Ms. Causey,
Thank you, Ms. Causey.
you're muted, Ms. Causey.
I believe Ms. Joes has her hand up, and if she would like to speak to this motion, I'm going to allow her and then come back to you, Ms. Rowe.
Okay.
Ms. Joes, did you want to speak to this issue?
No, I didn't want to speak to it. Thank you. A real just quick question, and maybe I'm simplifying it. This whole policy is for electronic meetings. So I fail to understand why you would need to then, if everybody's attending it electronically, why do you need permission to attend it electronically? Or is that, because the way I'm reading it, the whole policy is for special rules for electronic meetings. So
This
am I
particular
missing
section,
something?
ma'am, does deal with hybrid meetings. So when the rest of the meeting is face-to-face, that this section deals with what happens when individuals are unable to meet face-to-face. And members of the committee, just for your information, there are several staff members in attendance. I do not know if you'd like to hold this until the end of the agenda, because you have several staff members here ready, willing, and able to present on other policies.
Board members, if there's no objection, I'm going to move policy 8311 and also so item 3 and item 4 to the end of the agenda. Hearing no objections, we will move on to policy 1290, closing of school buildings. And for that, we have Dr. Scrivens and Mr. Dixit.
Good morning, Madam Chair, or I should say good afternoon. That shows you how long this day has been. Pete Dixit is with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dixit to present this item. Mr. Dixit.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. Good evening, Chair Causey, board members, and other colleagues. We are here to review policy 1290. For superintendent's rule, policies are scheduled for review, and this is the term for policy 7610. So the policy, the confusion that I'm having with the 1290 and 7610 is that upon the advice of law office, we are changing the numbering of this policy because it's facilities related. So 7000 series is the facilities related policy. So we are going to change, we are seeking change and calling it policy 7610. It establishes procedures and guidelines for permanent closure of building. The changes that we have made is to be consistent with the editing conventions. It is simplifying the policy statement and mirror the language of state regulation. We have also made sure that we have statements in there for encouraging opportunity for public input and superintendent's responsibility for ensuring that board is aware of the school change, the school closing. So with that, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer it.
Board members, if you have questions related to this, please raise your hand. And then I will call on board members in turn. This is just a reminder that per board consensus that we're not going around the dais in order to run the meeting more efficiently. But any board member that wants to speak to an agenda item can certainly take their time to be heard. So Ms. Pasteur, did you have a question or comment? Did Ms.
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind lowering your hand icon, that would be helpful. Any other board member with questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none. If there's no corrections or discussion, we will move policy 1290 forward for first reading as presented, noting that it is being renumbered 7610. The next item on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixit. The next item on the agenda is policy 6000, curriculum and instruction. And for that, we call on Dr. McComas and Ms. Shea. Good afternoon.
And excuse me, ma'am, may Dr. Scriven, Mr. Dixit, and Mr. Plate be excused?
If there's no further questions from committee members, you may be excused.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, and back to Dr. McComas and Ms. Shea.
Good afternoon. This is Ms. Shea. I believe Dr. McComas is going to speak first, but I'm not sure if she's muted. Dr. McComas? Okay, then. Yeah. Okay, then I will go ahead in case she was called somewhere else. So good afternoon, everyone, members of the board, Madam Chair, and members of this committee. I just want to apologize in advance. I've mentioned before, but my camera does not work, so I apologize that my camera is still off. Today, I am here to bring forward our recommendations for adjustments, recommended changes, first with Policy 6000. Policy 6000, as in accordance with our Policy and Superintendent's Rule 8130, is scheduled for review this school year. It is the policy which guides the definition, development, delivery, and review of the school system's curriculum. Our recommendations for Policy 6000 is really to provide consistency in the use of the term curriculum, and more specifically, our efforts were to align it with our board's equity policy. As you know, our Policy 0100 equity speaks to the need to ensure that all of our policies reflect an equity lens, and so the recommended changes we're bringing forward this evening for both Policy 6000 and then the one that we'll be doing next, 6002, really reflect our concerted efforts to ensure alignment in that policy language. So with that, I will turn it over for any additional questions.
Board members, are there questions or comments? I just had a question in general.
Sure.
Ms. Pasteur, who's here, she's also chair of the curriculum committee. Was this policy discussed in the curriculum committee in terms of what curriculum committee members felt would be helpful to update the policy?
So, Madam Chair, I did not provide this to the curriculum committee for their input. Is that something that the committee would like done?
No, I was just curious because I try to attend curriculum committees meetings, but I don't always get there. So I'm was just curious because they have a lot of good discussions there. So, okay. Any other comments or questions from board members? I wanted to talk about page 1, paragraph C. The board further believes that the development and implementation of a digital platform for curriculum delivery will help to ensure that every student has access to an equitable, effective digital learning environment to equip each student with the critical 21st century skills needed to become a globally competitive citizen in a culturally diverse world. And that has certainly been helpful to Baltimore County Public Schools in terms of the pivot that had to be made in March and the ongoing remote learning that we are using right now during the COVID pandemic. But what has come up as a function of the remote learning is the need, the understanding that textbooks are also important, and printed materials and manipulatives and things like that that go along with curriculum and instructional curriculum instructional materials. So I wonder if Dr. McComas could speak to that for a minute in terms of should there be something added that also speaks to the importance of that, or is that goes without saying in terms of what traditionally is available to students?
Hi, good evening. And thank you for the question. To me, it goes without saying, but certainly the will of the board, if you want to put some language in there. As you know, we have been working to make sure that there's appropriate balance and that we have materials. You know, we understand that COVID has been an extraordinary circumstance all around, but that we have been working year upon year to make sure that there is that balance of manipulatives and hard books and resources and text. And I know Ms. Shea often speaks to the opportunity to flood classrooms with books at every opportunity, and balance with the idea that those resources also can be accessible digitally for our 21st century learners. So it's certainly the will of the committee, but I hope you have confidence that you know the team that's in place believes that, and we work towards it, and that we think it's not necessarily one over the other, but it should be the appropriate blend depending upon content, subject, age level. So thank you, Ms. Causey. I hope I provide some support.
Yes, that was helpful. And I saw Ms. Shea raise her hand and also Ms. Pasteur.
Yes.
So I was just going to add, just for consideration, that in policy 6002, we do define instructional materials, and that's where we very explicitly say that it must include print and non-print and other materials. So I just referenced that as an opportunity where, to your point, Ms. Causey, it's more explicit about how we're defining what we mean by instructional materials in supportive curriculum.
Okay, thank you. And with that answer, do teachers or other educators have an opportunity to have curriculum presented in a non-digital way in terms of thinking about what is best suited for their, whether it's content or expertise, but also in terms of limiting screen time for our educators and our professionals, because we now know that's significant.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question, and certainly Ms. Shea jump in as appropriate. Is your question, do we incorporate teachers in our process of selecting materials?
No, in terms of presenting curriculum to the teachers, in terms of them having the standards and everything that goes into the curriculum. Is it available to the teachers and educators and staff in a non-digital platform, or is everything that the teachers and staff receive, is that all digital?
I see.
Hi, Ms. Causey. Could I jump in, Dr. McComas? This is Bernard Adams, and I know Ms. Shea will come in right after me, but just to clarify, we do provide, where appropriate, teachers have print resources. Examples recently supported by this board would be our Open Court and our Bridges series. Teachers have printed standards-aligned materials that they flip through and use every single day. Those Bridges also has some digital components that teachers can use as they support and work with students. We have placed and I should turn my camera on, forgive me. We have placed our curricular materials into the learning management system. Those can be printed. However, it doesn't always print, as you know, when you print off the web, it doesn't always print as neatly as when you have, for example, a PDF. And so I don't know if Ms. Shea has more to add, but I really would be, it isn't one or the other, but certainly we do have lots of things available digitally in Schoology so that teachers can access that. And then there are also print-based resources and curriculum materials that they also have and use. So no teacher is forced to only use his or their computer or to only use his or their textbooks.
Thank you. And Ms. Pasteur?
Thank you. All three staff members have actually gone to my comments, but there's a word that Dr. McComas used, that I think is important in terms of the language, and that is the word balance. And what Ms. Shea and Dr. Adams have just added to that is that we do all of them. In fact, many of the companies from which we get our textbooks also include or add a digital package to it. I do think that the question, and Dr. Adams alluded to it, that your question, Ms. Causey, about the training, the support, and everyone knows by now I'm always talking about professional development, and Dr. Adams went to that. So we always have those kinds of lofty conversations at C&I meetings whenever something is presented. What kind of PD will go with this material to ensure that all of our teachers know how to use it? So I think just because there have been questions about lately from the board and off of the board about textbooks versus the digital, that I'm going to side right there with Ms. Shea with, what did she say, print and non-print. As something that's included to offer a balance. That gives what all three of them have said. So people understand that when we're teaching our children, whether virtually or otherwise, that they get some handheld hard copy as well as the digital. I hope Ms. Shea, who I'm sure is going to speak now, thinks that what I said made sense. If not, forgive me.
So I want to make sure I know Ms. Rowe has her hand up. Ms. Causey, do you want me to wait for Ms. Rowe to ask her question or respond to Ms. Pasteur?
If you could respond and
sure.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Pasteur, I think what you said makes perfect sense, and I appreciate. I know all our work on curriculum committee. I feel you could do this presentation for me by now. So the one clarification that I want to add, again, I just think that here, and I want to make sure, because of course, as Dr. McComas said, the will of the committee is what we'll do. This particular item speaks to the platform for the delivery. And so I think that what I want to clarify is that while Dr. Adams is exactly right, the materials that are used for instruction, which is where textbooks and teacher editions and letter sound cards and math manipulatives are certainly, as defined in 6002, which we'll talk about pretty soon, really speak to that. This particular part is about the platform, and it is true that the way that our teachers are onboarded into accessing for delivery the curriculum is through the digital learning management system. So when we work in the summer for curriculum development workshops, we no longer mass print binders, which is the way, to be honest, and Ms. Pasteur may remember, and Mr. Offerman, that was the method of delivery. So if you focus on that aspect of this item, the format of curriculum delivery used to be mass printing of new inserts for your binder. And I just want to be clear, we don't do that. We don't do mass printing, although, as Dr. Adams said, I have on occasion worked directly with teachers who needed that as an accommodation. You mentioned, Ms. Causey, obviously we all right now have fatigue with eyes and digital, but I have worked before where there have been staff members who needed to access the curriculum for delivery in a different method. And we have worked with schools about how to create PDFs and print those materials. But I do want to make sure that I'm being clear that the primary platform for delivery, when we write and then share out with teachers the curriculum that's developed, is through the digital platform. So I hope that just adds a little bit of context, because I think that this conversation speaks to, again, our ongoing efforts to have a blend of instructional materials and resources for teachers. But we do not anymore send the trucks out with the binders as we have in past.
Thank you. Ms. Rowe?
So I would just like, I don't object to digital delivery of the curriculum, but it sounds like what we're talking about with digital delivery of the curriculum is something that's between the school system and the teachers, and not necessarily between the teachers and the students, and that what's between the teachers and the students is what you're calling instructional materials. But then if that's the case, and correct me if it's not the case, my question is precisely how does delivering the curriculum digitally contribute to equity? And are we saying the truckloads of binders was not equitable? Because the statement in the policy is that the reason we need to do this is for equity. And maybe it is. I'm sure there's 100 other reasons to do it. But I would like to know, since that's what the policy states, precisely what the equity difference is.
Sure. May I respond, or Dr. McComas, would you rather?
No, you can go ahead, Ms. Shea.
Okay.
It's queued up.
Well, face-to-face, I can get body language cues. So this is a little, I don't want to overstep. So, Ms. Rowe, I think it's a great question. I think that equitable access is really the point of that piece rather than the delivery. So you are right. There is a distinction in this about how do we get curriculum in the hands of our teachers so that they may use it for the purposes of planning high-quality instruction. And then there's the next piece of how does the teacher then deliver that to students. The part here of where having students have an access to an equitable, effective digital learning environment really speaks to the last part of that statement, which is about the critical 21st century skills. So if you think about instructional materials as the sum total of everything that we use at our disposal, and teachers have many different resources, a blend of things we put in their hands, print books, manipulatives, instructional tools, as well as the critical digital resources that are required for students to be able to navigate and be successful in a 21st century environment. And so in here, the idea about the equitable access is ensuring that we are providing real-time dynamic access in that digital learning environment so that students are learning those skills that are required to be effective. We call them the P21 skills, and you've heard us talk about those before. But that's really about our future goal of having them be globally competitive graduates. So I do want to make the distinction. It wasn't that the binders were inequitable, although clearly inefficient, but where that sort of can turn into an equitable access issue is, for example, a digital learning curriculum ensures that as we make dynamic changes and updates and supplements to resources, whether they be to support the needs of English learners, to support enrichment for advanced learners, to change based on new standards or new assessments, we are able to ensure that all students have equitable access in real time. Whereas that old delivery method, that would not have necessarily been the case. So you're right, they are two different things in terms of how we deliver things to teachers and then how teachers deliver them to students. The equitable access comes into how do we ensure that all of our students have the opportunity to engage in specific instruction for those 21st century skills.
Okay, so we are talking in this policy then, it's not just about delivery of the curriculum to teachers. We are talking about prioritizing delivery of instructional materials in a digital platform. So I guess what I want to know is when it comes to how we're spending money in our budget and someone says this specific thing is better to deliver in hard paper, et cetera, and we don't want to spend this on digital, and we approve this policy, is the implication of approving that language in this policy going to be that someone's going to say, oh, well, it's in the policy, so we just spent $400 million on an entire digital curriculum that possibly the board and public don't support. I just want to make sure that we're not putting something in policy that is going to mean something that we didn't necessarily mean when we were putting it in policy, because I think this board and the community supports both digital and actual books, face-to-face instruction. So there's, depending on what's being taught, there's a mix.
So I would just offer for clarification, and then I'll leave it to my colleagues. This particular part really speaks more to the idea of a learning management system. How do students and families and teachers access curriculum? It does not preclude or prohibit us. And again, I do think we often, in our family and academics, 6000 and 6002 are always together. They're like peanut butter and jelly for us. And I think as we move into that conversation, some of the questions you're raising about specific materials selected for curriculum really better suited for what you're raising as a potential concern. This in our interpretation and the discussions we have, and I also want to add, this is not a proposed revision. This language was here before, because I think it speaks to how do we make sure that in a system of 115,000 plus students and teachers, we are moving into the 21st century of how we deliver that curriculum, which is more about that learning management system and less about choosing a particular resource for a course or for the teaching of math or ELA or phonics.
Okay, so you're talking about Schoology.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And I don't want to reference it has to be a particular product name, but that's what we use currently as our learning management system. Yeah.
Okay, so you're basically saying in this policy that for the sake of equity and whatever other reason there might be, because I'm sure there's other reasons, that we're going to use Schoology or like systems to serve the function that Schoology is currently serving.
Correct, which we tend to call like a learning management system. The learning management system is where it says the digital platform for curriculum delivery. That is what we mean by a learning management system.
See, all in your vocabulary. I'm going to get this one day.
Great question, Ms. Rowe.
Right, just Ms. Rowe, think about the learning management system as that platform in which we are able to share information and resources. We used to have, what was our old previous one? N-Grade. I happen to know because my husband is a teacher in Harford County, they use It's Learning. So there's lots of different products out there that serve that purpose. Colleges sometimes use Blackboard. Yes, it's our closet where we open up and everything.
And the resources are the things you have in the pantry. And then the classroom, the kitchen.
Thank you, Renard.
I'm not against any of that. I just want to make sure we're clear that we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Or at least maybe I'm the only one who doesn't, but I want to know.
No, I want you to know too, Ms. Rowe.
Thank you. And Mr. Hamza has his hand up. Mr. Hamza.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so nothing. I wanted just to reiterate Ms. Shea's point about the equity component. I think in the next century, technology, especially on the college level and even in high schools, is going to be the dominant piece of learning. And in schools like mine, where you have like ESOL students, English learning students who can't afford computers, I think it causes an equity issue where some students can't even manage the system. So I've seen students where they can't even access Schoology and they need support from a teacher at home. So it is an equity problem. I think as technology is taking over education, we need to also address the challenges of those students who are don't know how to use certain systems, and I think it is important piece of curriculum. So I do support this policy. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Hamza. I would just like to offer an amendment to the policy. I would move that we add a paragraph D, and we will rename the current paragraph D, paragraph E, that says curriculum delivery for staff and students will be balanced with printed materials as appropriate, period. Is there a second?
Second.
And just to speak to that for a moment, I didn't want to make it too broad because as Dr. McComas and Ms. Shea and Dr. Renard, Dr. Adams, point out, they're already doing this. But I think it warrants acknowledging that it's being done and also that it should continue as appropriate. And the appropriateness is an administrative function of the superintendent and the rest of the team. So I would just offer that. Are there any other questions or comments about that? If not, we can take a vote on it. Ms. Clark?
I had a question.
I'm sorry. Is that
Josh?
Mr. Mahamza?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought my understanding and explanation was the next policy would be addressing more of the instruction component, and this is just mainly about the learning systems, so like schools and the other systems we use digitally. Could staff readdress that point?
Ms. Shea, Mr. Mahumsma wanted you to draw the distinction between
Sure.
6000 and 6002.
Yes. So, Mr. Mahamza, to your point, paragraph C that Ms. Causey had pointed out that talks about the board further believes that the development and implementation of a digital platform for curriculum delivery, that paragraph is what I was addressing, speaks specifically to the learning management systems. The actual policy talks in a broader sense about the development of curriculum and about how we have to ensure that we have an instructional program that ensures access to high quality and effective instruction for all students. So what I was describing before, you're correct that I do believe that 6002 speaks more specifically to the materials for instruction, which is where I think this idea of a blend of print and non-print is really explicitly stated. But I do want to clarify, Policy 6000 is not an entire policy dedicated to a learning management system. When I said that, I was talking specifically about the paragraph C that Ms. Causey had referenced. Hopefully that clarifies a bit.
Thank you. Mr. Mahamza, does that clarify it for you?
Yeah, and your motion is for what paragraph again? Was it D?
It would be separate from C. It would be D, and then D would become E. Curriculum delivery for students and staff will be balanced with print materials as appropriate. So if there's no other comments or questions, Ms. Clark, if you can just go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Mahumza?
Abstain.
Mr. Opperman?
Abstain.
Ms. Rowe?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Abstain.
Ms. Causey?
Yes.
So the vote is 3-2.
I'm going to ask Ms. Howie, let me know if this is correct, but I'm going to ask to redo the vote. I think it's important for board members to, unless there's some specific reason to abstain, to go ahead and vote a yes or a no. Is that appropriate, Ms. Howie?
I don't think that's appropriate.
You are in what's considered a small assembly. The motion failed. You did not have a majority of the members of the committee who voted for your motion.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, board members, are there other questions or comments related to policy 6000? Hearing none, policy 6000 is moved forward for first reading as presented. The next policy is policy 6002, selection of instructional materials.
Thank you. Dr. McComas, may I begin or did you want to begin?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mute. You go ahead and begin, Ms. Shea. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, in accordance with Board of Education Policy and Superintendent's Rule 8130, Policy 6002 is scheduled for review in this school year. Policy 6002 outlines the board's responsibility for the selection and evaluation of instructional materials to support and enrich the educational program in Baltimore County Public Schools. Our recommendations for the revisions to Policy 6002, as I already stated, more fully define instructional materials, include specific language to ensure that instructional materials raise the academic bar and close achievement gaps, specifically outline standards to require the superintendent to evaluate the effectiveness of instructional materials prior to any contract renewal or modification, include an implementation section, and then, as was the case with Policy 6000, more specifically align it with the board's equity policy. So I open it for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Board members, are there questions or comments related to Policy 6002? Ms. Shea, I just had a question regarding on page 1, the paragraph A at the end of the items that are deleted. Instructional materials are defined as instructional content approved for system-wide use and provided to students regardless of format, including printed or digital materials. Is there a reason that was?
It was moved to Section 2 definition of instructional materials.
Oh, sorry, there it is.
No worries.
Thank you.
Of course.
And Ms. Howie, this has not been updated since 2014. So
No,
have there been any significant changes in the law related to instructional materials?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, board members, if there's no questions or comments, Policy 6002 will move forward for first reader as presented.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Shea.
And Ms. Causey, may Ms. Shea be excused. She's not on the agenda for the next item.
Certainly. Have a good afternoon.
Actually, Ms. Howie, I think Dr. McComas wanted me to stay in case there were questions, but I will defer to you. And no, that's okay. Dr. McComas, would you like me to stay or go start?
Just through the grading and reporting, just in case.
If that's all right.
Yeah, but yeah, unless you want to go home and cook dinner.
I can wait a little longer. Thank you. But thank you, Ms. Howie, for thinking of me.
Okay, great.
Not a problem.
So our next item is regarding curriculum and instruction regarding Policy 5210, grading and reporting. At our September meeting, the committee discussed whether Policy 5210 should remain unchanged or whether it should be amended. Staff graciously offered to provide an overview of how the procedures that implement this policy came to be, what the rationale was, and how the procedures are being implemented. So we welcome Dr. McComas again and Dr. Adams to explain these issues to us.
Hi, let's go. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. McComas.
Oh, no, I was just going to very much say, once again, my team will go ahead and take the center stage and get us started. So thank you, Dr. Adams.
Absolutely. Good evening again, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Team BCPS staff members. We're pleased to be able to provide this overview of grading and reporting. I understand that there has been recent curiosity by the full board around recent grading guidance that was published by our division, and Dr. McComas and Ms. Shea and I are working on finalizing that presentation for next Tuesday's board meeting. I say that to say you may have questions in regard to that. This presentation as designed may not answer your questions, but certainly we're here and available to answer those questions. So grading and reporting. In spring of 2014, a grading and reporting committee was formed by the Chief Academic Officer to review and revise Policy 5210. Prior to 2014, the policy had last been revised in 1997. The guiding question of the committee was, is shown on the screen before you, was how confident are we that grades assigned to students are consistent, accurate, meaningful, and supportive of learning? The committee grounded its work in the research of two international scholars in grading, reporting, assessment, and communication of learning. They are Mr. Ken O'Connor and Ms. Jan Chapuis. I always mispronounce her last name. Ken O'Connor has actually presented to our team BCPS principals. He is a well-renowned expert on student grading and communication of student achievement against standards. Ms. Chapuis is a renowned expert in assessment and also on student learning and learning motivations. And one of the things that the committee considered were the three different types of learning orientations that students often have, those being a performance or an ego orientation, a task completion orientation, which is, Dr. McComas expects me to do it, so I do it, or a learning orientation, which is my love of learning drives the fact that I want to do well in class and do well in my studies. A proposed policy, was brought to the committee at that time. It was adopted by the full board in June 2015 and was delayed for implementation for June until July 2016, with the understanding, as Ms. Pasteur had previously mentioned, that we would have a year to provide the required and necessary professional learning to administrators and teachers. So during implementation, prior to implementation, as I mentioned, we had 1 year of professional learning that was provided on a monthly basis prior to implementation of the revised policy. That monthly professional development happened in two simultaneous strands. There was a strand for principals. It happened monthly at the principals' leadership development meetings. And then our staff development teachers, at the time they were called STAT teachers, they received monthly PD on grading and reporting, and then together, principals and their staff development teachers turnkeyed the professional learning to teachers in their building. So the expectation, for example, was the topics that we presented on and provided professional learning on in September were expected to be turnkeyed by the end of the following month by the principal and his, her, or their administrative team. During implementation, during the 2016-17 year, the Division of Curriculum Instruction, published weekly teacher tips. These were information and guidance that was provided directly to teachers every week by the Chief Academic Officer. We continued to hold grading and reporting steering committee meetings. During 2016-17, those were held every other month. In 17-18, those were held quarterly. We have not held meetings since May of 2018 at this time, and that is the last time the procedures manual had any revisions. Monthly staff development with teacher PD and question and answer sessions continued. There was ongoing grading and reporting feedback via a web portal and an email account, grading@bcps.org. That email account comes to my inbox, and I monitor that. The committee would often suggest revisions or clarifications, and so we would make those based on the committee's work. And then each year we send 8 yearly reminders to schools around grading and reporting. These are sent before the start of school, and then before it's time for interim progress, and before the end of each marking period. And so at the last meeting, board members had questions and were questioning the policy versus the rule, and I shared that the source of many of the questions were found neither in policy nor rule, but were in fact in the grading and reporting procedures manual. What policy 5210 does state, board policy, is that the grades will have a consistent meaning, that they should be based on grade level and or course level expectations as outlined in the curriculum, that grades are an essential way to communicate student progress, that we expect meaningful feedback on student achievement to be provided, and finally, that grades should be aligned to content standards and based on a body of evidence. Further, in Rule 5210 outlines that all the grade symbols, the scales, and the procedures that teachers and schools should use for grades and grade reporting are set forth in the actual procedures manual. And what I'll do over the next few slides is unpack some of the big ideas I heard from the committee at the last meeting. Actually, I'm going to talk about this first. So some of our ideas, as I stated at the beginning, is the committee wanted to ensure that grades were equitable, or move towards more equitable grading so that students who did the same work in different classrooms to the same quality should receive a similar grade. We wanted grades to be accurate. This meant that grades had to be based solely on student achievement, and other factors like behavior and attendance would not be used to calculate the grade. This does not mean that we stop reporting or communicating behavior and attendance, because we certainly do that. But what we wanted to get away from were factors such as, in some schools, students were awarded extra points for bringing in tissues. We wanted grading and reporting to be specific. In our dream world, teachers are so transparent with their practices and with the expectation of an assignment before students complete the assignment, that students should be able to sort of say, oh, I bet I got a B on that, or I feel like I got an A when I check my work against the rubric. And then finally, we wanted grading and reporting to be timely. We wanted feedback. What the research tells us is that giving feedback as closely to the assignment or the activity as possible allows and better positions students to internalize the feedback right away and make adjustments that would then improve their performance. The grading and reporting procedures manual has 6 guiding practices that are outlined within it. I'll read those to you very quickly. First, grading practices must be supportive of learning. This leads to beliefs such as not necessarily using or positioning grades to be used as punishment. Guiding practice 2 says that marking period grades will be based solely on achievement or in grade level standards, and that classroom conduct, work completion and working well with others will be reported separately. Guiding practice 3 is where the redo policy comes from. It states that students will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency. Grades 4 is grades will be based on a body of evidence, and that's really sort of like the portfolio, if you will, of each student's work. Guiding practice 5 says that we will use a consistent grade scale to score assignments and assessments in our learning management system. And then our last guiding practice says that we will make accommodations and modifications for our exceptional learners, most notably our students with disabilities and our English learners. So first, I wanted to talk a bit about the grading scales. The grading and reporting manual's guiding practice says that a consistent grade scale will be used. As the committee did its work, it examined 2 different grade scales, a 50-point scale and the traditional 100-point scale, which is what most of us experienced in school at all levels, and most of those of us who've taught actually use this 100-point scale. What research has shown us recently is that the 100-point scale, as demonstrated on the slide, has unequal intervals. A failing grade of E carries 6 times the weight as any of the other grade scores, which makes it very challenging. For example, if I were to earn a 23% on an assignment, bringing my grade point average up and my performance average up for that marking period becomes very, very challenging. And so one of the things the committee explored was the use of a 50-point scale, which has equal intervals where every letter grade has and is worth 10 points, and it has a floor of 50. This is not uncommon and is in fact how all standardized assessments work, like SAT, PSAT, MCAT. There's a lowest possible score, and then there's a highest possible score. And so at the time, there was not an appetite to choose one completely over the other. And so both of these grade scales were approved, and principals at the beginning or before the beginning of each school year discuss with their communities and their leadership teams around the grade scale that all teachers in the building will use. Next, we talked about at the last meeting this idea of attendance and you know, in our previous policy, students experienced 1 or 2 letter grade deductions for attendance and being absent at a certain percentage. And so the current research suggests and actually states that you should decouple attendance from grades and behavior. And so the grading and reporting procedure manuals, as I mentioned earlier, says that we're going to base them solely on achievement, and that those other factors will be reported separately. And so what I have on the screen before you, on the left side of the screen is a sample report card, a sample high school report card, which reports out on the student's achievement. Included on the back of the high school report card and the middle school report card, and as a part of the elementary report card, is the BCPS skills and conduct indicators. These are the vehicle by which teachers can communicate to students and families their classroom conduct, students' work completion, how well they work with others, other adults, and how well they work with students. And as you can see, there's a scale there that goes up along the left-hand side of the indicator list, going from no evidence to insufficient evidence to developing to actually meeting expectations. Next, I wanted to take a moment to discuss reassessment, or what's commonly known as redos. The guiding practice here is that students will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency. What I'd like to make sure I clarify is that multiple does not mean unlimited, and multiple opportunities do not have to be provided for every assessment, assignment, or task that students are given. And so in accordance with that, we've laid out parameters that schools may utilize when developing their reassessment procedures. Every school is allowed to develop reassessment procedures that are in alignment with the grading and reporting procedures manual. And so some of that guidance is listed on the screen before you. We heard very early on from some principals that students were, in some cases, not even attempting an assignment and just writing their name on it and saying redo. That certainly was not our intention, and certainly not what we believe should be permissible or is indicative of the work habits we want students to learn. And so these guidelines were put in place for schools to consider, and I just wanted to talk you through a bit of them. First, teachers and or school teams should carefully consider each of the assignments and determine whether or not it is eligible to be redone. We ask typically that this happen. If it doesn't happen at the school-wide level, we understand, you know, at a high school, that's 140 staff. We do ask at a grade level or a department level for these procedures to be consistent. So I know when I'm in chemistry and biology, I have certain redo procedures. When I'm in English and social studies, they may be a little bit different, but they're consistent across world history, U.S. history, and American government. If an assignment is eligible to be redone, we expect teachers to clearly communicate that to students. And for an eligible assignment to be able to be redone, we expect students to submit them on time and to show what we call a reasonable effort. This means that I cannot simply sign my name to Ms. Shea's biology lab and say redo. I need to show that I attempted reasonably with my effort to complete the assignment. We expect teachers to provide students feedback and additional learning opportunities prior to resubmission. Certainly, if Renard submits something to Ms. Pasteur and it doesn't meet the standard, if she simply just gives me an opportunity to resubmit it without me having another opportunity to learn or address my learning gaps, then I may give her the same exact quality of work. And so we expect there to be some reteaching in there. We have curriculum-based assessments here. They're noted as summative unit assessments. We did make a distinction that they cannot be retaken or redone. And this was based on feedback from our teachers. We do have we do have procedures and policy around lawful and unlawful absences, and one of the committee compromises was teachers were saying, but Renard cut class. Do I have to give him makeup work if he was absent and doesn't have a lawful reason for being absent? And we said, actually, you don't. If the absence is unlawful, you do not have to provide the makeup work. However, a teacher at his, her, or their discretion may still provide that makeup work as long as it is in accordance with the school's established procedures for reassessment. And those were the topics, the three big topics that I heard Ms. Pasteur, specifically Mr. Offerman and Ms. Rowe mentioned last time. And so I quickly wanted to just provide an overview of how that is operationalized currently in the school system. And with that, I am certainly willing, able, and excited to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adams, for that presentation. And board members, if you want to raise your hand icon, and I will call on you to have comments or questions. And I see Mr. Offerman.
Yes. Can we go back to the redo slide, please?
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Take your time. Okay. Is it possible that, and I haven't read this, I've just seen this today for the first time in this kind of detail. Is it possible that a principal at one school or a team leadership at one school could provide, is providing a different timeline for students being able to turn work in at the end of a marking period than perhaps a different school is?
Well, what I would offer, thank you so much for that question, Mr. Offerman. What I would offer is these procedures and parameters were created because there are deadlines, right? We would love to provide students with all the time in the world, but we know that isn't possible or reasonable and isn't fair to teachers who have the grading to do. And so my understanding is, from what I've heard from my principal colleagues, is that certainly missing work is due by the end of the marking period. We do, however, have a marking period grade code that does provide an extension for students and teachers, and that is the I, which stands for incomplete or insufficient evidence. The extension that is provided is system controlled and not within the current authority of the principal to extend without contacting Dr. McComas or one of the community superintendents around why an extension. Certainly, if Ms. Shea has a medical emergency and she's not able to complete all her work, and I don't have enough evidence to give her a marking period grade, I can provide her an I that in a typical year provides a student with 10 school days. Given the pandemic, we have increased that window to 15. And as the principal, Dr. McComas could say, Megan is still sick and still is unable even as we enter the 15th day. And Dr. McComas could go in and extend that time, but that would really be on an individual case-by-case basis.
Thank you, and I think that part is great. Let me ask I have a few other questions if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all.
I saw the logic or the presentation toward not including students, not including students' attendance. But I did note, and I asked for a data list, and I don't have the actual data in front of me at the moment, that our high school rate of attendance has dropped, particularly the seniors, in the years since this policy was actually put in place. And I have, in speaking with high school teachers, heard that they feel strongly that this is in part, and I'm not talking about I'm not talking about since I'm talking about before 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
okay. I've heard in part that a lot of them feel strongly that because of this discoupling, that the students are not as motivated or don't see class attendance as or school attendance even as an essential part of being successful. And I know in Baltimore County, because we want to educate the whole child, that we want them to understand that attending is sort of the minimal requirement in almost anything, and almost anything that students would do, not only in school but also if they go into college or work or any other pursuit. So I guess I'd like to know if you can comment on it. Is if you see this being an issue, or do you think is this just some kind of a strange coincidence?
Thank you so much for that question, Mr. Offerman, and I'm aware of that concern among our high school teachers. We, of course, had elementary, middle, and high school teachers and administrators on our grading and reporting steering committees. So I have a few thoughts that I'd like to offer. The previous policy, which I actually have a copy of, that's why I was looking to my side. I had to get somebody to dig it out of the archives. There was a heavy penalty for not attending school. And it could, as I mentioned earlier, result in a letter grade drop of 2 letter grades. So a student could be performing at the level of an A, and based on his, her, or their attendance, get a C automatically. So there was a huge penalty there that we, the committee at the time, and the board at the time, decided to not keep in place. Other things have also happened since 1997. As you might imagine. MSDE has increased the age of mandatory attendance up through the high school years. They've done that gradually over the last, I believe it was, I think they completed that about 3 years ago now, where they are requiring, you only had to go to school until you were 16 at one point, and they have brought that up. I believe it ends at 18 now. So the students are actually required to be in school. And I know, as you are aware, as a former high school teacher and counselor, high school students also have to have a certain amount, courses have to have a certain amount of credit hours. And so I completely understand the students' concern. The question I always have when teachers bring this concern up around students are not coming to school, are the students still passing? If the students are still earning A's and B's and not regularly attending school, as an administrator or a department chair, I would then want to investigate the instructional rigor that's going on in the classroom. Because if I can learn without ever being in Mr. Offerman's class, then it would seem to me that something might be a little off there, that is possible. Now, I know we have some incredibly capable and gifted students who could probably do any assignment I gave to them. Ms. Shea is an example of a grown-up gifted student that completes every assignment thrown her way. So I can imagine what it would have been like teaching her and trying to stay 3 steps ahead of her. But those are the thoughts that I have around that. I really personally believe this idea of punishing grades as punishment is unfortunate. What we also do at the secondary level is we record daily attendance and period attendance, and schools follow up with phone calls to parents around both of those things. And we have maintained that period level attendance because administrators and counselors and social workers really wanted to be able to pinpoint, okay, Renard's showing up in the morning, but he's not going to Miss Pasteur's English class. What's going on there? And how do we unpack that and get him into that class so that he can be better poised for success? So those are my thoughts on the idea and component of attendance. And if it would be the chair or committee's pleasure, I can certainly provide these older documents. I printed mine in red and blue so I would not confuse myself, so you could see what the language used to say and how it really confined teacher choice and latitude in ways that I don't know that our teachers would appreciate at the moment.
If I just may add to that comment, I'm sorry, Mr. Offerman, to jump in front of you. I just would like to say, one, I think it's really, because it is very tempting to want to go back and say we're going to punish a student's academic record because of conduct, right? And in this case, it's attendance. And certainly all of us want students attending every day, every class. That is a shared value for all of us. I think it always makes me go back to think, like, what is the right tool to adjust that behavior, right? Because if a student is attending, what's at the root cause of that? Is it because they're not appropriately challenged in their coursework? Is there something else in their life? I had a student one time who stopped attending. She was a senior. What we found out, because she was falling short of graduation, was her mother was dying, and she chose every day to be at her mother's side instead of, and we didn't know as a school. So I think it's important to keep in mind, like, when we want to shift the conduct or the behavior, in this case attendance, like, what's the right tool for that job, right? Is it that we reduce their academic acknowledgement because of an issue, that a different approach may be the more appropriate approach? Last thing I'll just say, my father always said, you have to have the right tool for the job, hon. And if you're not using the right tool, you're not going to get the job done well. And so I think when we look at a lot of these conduct pieces, it's tempting sometimes to use the wrong tool because that's what the traditional tool is. So I just offer that for us as a group in this work together. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Offerman.
Just a comment to Dr. Adams. I'm not overly concerned about the students earning A's and B's. The majority of the time, I would think that those students have had the discipline to be successful. My concern is students who are just, if we use the word, scraping by. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, again, often these are students who, not always. I don't have data to support this, but it seems to me those are students that having them understand the absolute importance of being there and attending, okay, whether it be a school classroom, a job, a college, whatever, and that remains my concern. Perhaps some staff could maybe look into this attendance situation again prior to COVID, and perhaps come up with possible explanations of, again, I heard clearly what you said about the state changing the age limit that way, but I still have that major concern. On a whole other direction, okay, at this point that way, is homework. I know homework is given. I know homework is certainly it's certainly looked at and reviewed, and I'm sure it's very important. I don't want to ever bother any child with any student with busy work. But I also think that again, and this is my own personal opinion, that there are things you have to do beyond your school or work day, okay, in order to be successful. And while we are reviewing this, I'm wondering if there's, if we don't value, if we don't give a great attachment to it at any point, and it has no bearing. And are we getting the same amount of homework done? Have we ever surveyed that? Sure. Have we ever asked teachers, what has happened since that requirement changed?
Sure, Mr. Offerman, if I could respond. One, to your earlier point around attendance, stealing some thunder from next week's presentation, Ms. Murray and Mr. Mahumsma are organizing student focus groups for Ms. Shea, myself, and Dr. Nieves to hear directly from our students around current context, right? Things with which and why they're struggling. I have a good friend. She's a high school teacher right here in the system. She teaches English, and we checked in this weekend, and she said only 3 of her students are totally unaccounted for, but she has about 15 or 20 that aren't attending for various reasons. A couple of them are working because their parents have lost their jobs and they need income in the family. Some of them are caring for sick and other family members. And so I understand and am more than willing and hungry, actually, to hear from our students. I knew I had forgotten a slide, and I couldn't remember what it was, and it was homework. And so what I want to share, first and foremost, is there is a pervasive myth that we did away with homework, and that is not true. What we asked teachers to do was distinguish between homework that's practice, me memorizing my times tables, versus homework that's meant for me to demonstrate and evaluate my learning, a term paper, a essay, a biology lab, a geometry theorem. So it is not that we did away with homework. We absolutely did not. We asked teachers to be clear when, to use your words, Mr. Offerman, when it might feel like busy work, then maybe we don't grade that. We could score it and understand it and use it in terms of knowing what students know. But when it's a term paper, when it's your summer reading project, when it's a biology or a chemistry lab that you're doing at home, oh yeah, those get graded and can be even considered major assignments in the grade book. So we will continue to try to clarify that because certainly we did not do away with homework. Thank you for that question.
Please allow me to add to that. I think one of the things when we're talking about homework in particular is when we talk about grading, it is really one of the very clear examples of where our equity work becomes operationalized. Because I just ask that when you think about students who may have, they may have single family support systems, there may be various challenges in the home environment to support students. And certainly as students get older, they have more agency to try to mitigate some of the challenges that they have around completing homework. But I just ask that we keep in mind that once we are asking students to do those things independent of our support, and we are penalizing them if they don't do them, then we are really holding disadvantage work. It's kind of compounding interest for those families, those students that may be impoverished, that may have various challenges at home. So I think I just ask that as a committee, as we continue to work through to make our grading policy truly equitable and truly robust at the same time, that this here is equity work. It's equity in action. And it can be difficult. And I think homework is one of the particular areas where it can really shine light on that. So I just offer that for all of us to think about as we continue to move forward again in this work together. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Offerman, I'm sorry, in the interest of time, we do have other staff that is here with a very important presentation as well. The Office of Law presentation regarding special education. So, Mr. Offerman, if I could just ask that any additional questions you could email and
yes, I will. Thank you.
Get a chance.
And then Ms. Pasteur can finish us up here.
All right, real quickly. You've all had this conversation about the attendance and the homework. I've always been an administrator at a predominantly African-American school, other than when I was at Carver and Sudbrook. But in the Baltimore City, always. Baltimore County, you know where. And this is what I need to say when we're talking about equity. I have a real strong issue about homework and attendance, because what we are trying to help our young people with is not just about the here and now. It is about just what the compass says, college and career readiness. So we're also talking about preparing them and helping them to have those skills and those life characteristics that they're going to carry when they leave us. And I can't begin to tell you how many of my children I have seen after high school who I have beaten down like slaves and yard dogs. That's an ugly description, but it's so about being in school, about doing their assignments. And how many times they have said, when I was campaigning, people would stop me on the street to say, thank you for doing that. And I've been on my job X number of years. I have a home, I have a this. And it would have been very easy to say, oh yeah, look, they are already disenfranchised. But are we going to disenfranchise them for the rest of their lives? So, Dr. McComas, you said it when you gave your example. We have to know the whole child. What we're talking about is getting to know. You know what Dr. Williams says, every child should have someone in that building? Getting to know who that child is and knowing the difference between a child who really has a hardship and how we can help that child both with attendance and doing home assignment. And I love, because I used to beat down the former superintendent, Dr. S. Dallas Dance, PhD, about that whole homework thing. And the reality is that when we're giving them meaningful things now, except that little stuff that a lot of teachers give them to do at night, and then you want to grade it or score it or whatever, but you're giving them the meaningful opportunities about which you just spoke. That's building character. That's building that institutional and that intellectual character. But we cannot give up on expecting our children to be in school and then just saying, okay, for real, I need to talk to you about how we can help you. Because the reality is, Mr. Offerman is correct. I've stood with many a principal and heard how the attendance rate is dropping among our older ones. We've got to help them find that way if they are having issues, not just take something off the plate. So I'm speaking now as this African-American woman, old one, and all the old people who came before me and now who would beat their children into oblivion. I do have an uncle whose mother and father, they had 8 children, all boys, and then she ended up by herself trying to raise them. And each one of them had to get up, and she had to do, Miss Mickey had to do whatever she had to do, but every one of those 8 boys needed to be going to school and dealing with the world that they were going to find, because the reality is, if they don't have those characteristics and those work ethics, it is real easy to wipe off and just ignore. One more disenfranchised, whether you're poor or black, as the writer Jerome Wright said, poor, black, and in real trouble. And you can add other things. So as we talk about this, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we have to find that blend and keep talking about the whole child and getting to know that child. So we know the difference between when somebody is jiving us and knows how to play the game and when it's real. That's all. Thank you.
If I may, I know you need to move on, Ms. Causey. It might be, if the board would wish, attendance falls with Dr. Zarchin and Dr. Nieves, and of course we work very closely with Dr. Nieves around, attendance and social emotional supports. And I'm wondering if it might be helpful for the committee to have him present to provide a deeper understanding around how they are approaching attendance, because it is something we still work on. We haven't let it go, but I can't intelligently speak on it on the spot the way he would be able to. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pasteur, and thank you, Dr. Adams. Committee members, if there is no objection, we will take Dr. Adams up on his suggestion and request Dr. Zarchin to come at a future meeting when convenient and bring us information about that. I just want to dovetail with Mr. Offerman and Ms. Pasteur. I think there's elements of this, of the implementation that have not been helpful in terms of raising the bar and closing the gap and preparing our children for the future, as Ms. Pasteur pointed out, so that there needs to be additional consideration and thought and learning, and we really appreciate you all being here today from Curriculum and Instruction, because it is very helpful. I had a concern about the grading scales in general, but also the fact that at any school, it could change any year, and where's the consistency in that? So, but we will continue this discussion. We appreciate all that groundwork. And now we're going to move on to Office of Law presentation, Special Education Laws and Discipline. And for that, we have Mr. Stephen Coles.
Ms. Causey and members of the committee, as Mr. Coles is getting ready to present, I just wanted to introduce him to you briefly. Oh, and I'm sorry, may Dr. McComas, Dr. Adams, and Ms. Shea now be excused?
Yes, they may, with our gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give a, thanks, colleagues. Just wanted to give a brief introduction of Mr. Coles, because I am extremely honored to work with him. I've worked with him since 2003. When he came to the school system from the Maryland State Department of Education. He's a graduate of the University of Maryland School of Law. I am not exaggerating when I say that Stephen is a nationally recognized expert in special education law. He has spoken at a number of national conferences on special ed and is very well respected in the field. I tell people that I don't do Windows and I don't do special ed, that Stephen does that. But in addition to having an incredible grasp of the subject matter, Stephen cares about what happens to kids. And I'm just going to leave you with this story, and I know he's going to thank me for this tomorrow, or not thank me for this tomorrow. Our office went out and goes out annually just to celebrate staff. And last year we went out to celebrate staff. And the owner of the restaurant came to our table, and because the reservations were in Stephen's name, and said, "Are you Stephen Coles from BCPS? Here is my son." When we moved from California, we didn't know what to do. We were very disappointed with the school system that we came from. But because of you, Mr. Coles, my son is now in college, and my son is doing well. Because of the way that Stephen approached what is an incredibly, incredibly difficult field of law. And because he looks at kids and whether or not kids are getting what they need, I am so proud that he is my colleague and a rock star among rock stars. So with that, Mr. Coles, you can thank me later.
Well, I guess I'll thank you now. I appreciate the introduction. Good evening, everybody, Ms. Causey, members of the committee. What we're going to do tonight is just cover a little bit of an overview of special education law. And Jim, you can go to the next slide. That'd be great. Special education really is the entire system of legal procedures. The IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, establishes the protections and defines the requirements that the school system must follow to address the needs of students with disabilities within the system. And you can go to the next slide. There are several key provisions of the law which delineate the school system responsibility to students with disabilities. One of the things that you'll see is in Policy 6402, it articulates the board's commitment to providing the education to the students with disabilities. And in that policy, you'll see there is the child find obligation. There is the obligation to provide a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. There is the requirement to serve students in the least restrictive environment. IDEA requires students to be identified, located, and evaluated by systems. This is called child find. It's an affirmative obligation on behalf of the school system, which means that the school system has the duty to evaluate even if the parent does not refer the child to the system. It's our obligation, if a student is struggling and we believe the student has a disability, to make the referral to see if that student needs additional supports. FAPE, which is the provision of special ed and related services, accommodations, supports, modifications for a student with a disability, is designed to allow the student to make progress in the general ed curriculum and towards achieving the goals in the student's individualized education program, or IEP. That's actually reflected in board policy in the statements in A and C. Now, the IDEA also requires that students be provided the education services in the least restrictive environment, meaning the students should have access to non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. There is a presumption that the student will be served in the general education environment in their home school, unless it is demonstrated that the student is unable to receive an educational benefit from that environment, even with supplemental aids, supports, and behavior interventions and special education services. And if you'd switch to slide 4, in terms of child find, the provision of FAPE, the determination of least restrictive environment, the vehicle which those decisions are made is the IEP team, or Individualized Education Program team. And the IEP team requires the school system have at least 4 members. The parents of the child are always required to be invited, and if they cannot attend, school systems really should be making efforts for them to attend virtually, whether it's by phone, whether it's now by Microsoft Teams, but they should be taking the steps to convince that parent to attend because it's about their child. It should also include not less than 1 regular education teacher of the child, meaning somebody who actually teaches the child currently in the general education environment, not less than 1 special education teacher of the child, or if appropriate, let's say it's a speech language student, the special education teacher or speech language pathologist of the child would participate. And then if we switch to the next slide, then the 4th member is actually the representative of the public agency, which is known as the IEP team chairperson. At our elementary schools, that's a very complicated job because most of the time they're also an assistant principal. So they're trying to be the team manager, the facilitator of the team, along with running all the other aspects of being a assistant principal. At the high school level, you sometimes will have them be a department chair along with a team chair, which makes it difficult because the representative of the public agency is supposed to be somebody qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instruction, knowledgeable about the general ed curriculum, and knowledgeable about what services, supports, programs are available in the school system. The school system is required to invite the parent and to ensure that they participate because they're an equal partner in the decision making. And you can change to the next slide. So the parent, under parent consent, has to consent when there's the initial evaluation. So the very first time that the school system is looking to evaluate the child for eligibility purposes, the parent has to provide consent. In addition, if the student is eligible and we then develop the IEP, the parent must provide consent for that initial provision of services. So it's a separate consent. So you can't say, oh, they gave us permission to evaluate, now we can put them in whatever program. The parent has to consent a second time. The parent also has the unchallenged right to say, no, I don't want the initial provision of special ed services, and that student then is treated as a general ed student. And you can switch to the next slide. In Maryland, there are some special consent requirements. If you want to include restraint or seclusion in an IEP or a behavior plan as a planned intervention, that has to be included in the IEP, and you have to get special consent from the parent. If the student's no longer going to take the regular state assessments and is going to be put in an alternative educational program that doesn't teach the regular curriculum, then you have to get parent consent for that. Or if you're switching a student who's in high school or entering 11th, 12th grade, and you're going to say that they're no longer going to get a diploma and they have to be on the certificate program, Maryland requires that you give the parent the opportunity to consent or challenge that decision. So if you switch to the next slide, after the initial consent for special ed, it is then the school system's obligation to ensure that FAPE is provided. So once the parent puts the student into special education services, the school system has the affirmative obligation and responsibility to ensure that that IEP is appropriate to address that child's needs, and the parent no longer has to consent to those changes, but they do have a right to challenge those changes. And that's where the due process part of the law comes in. And we can switch to the next slide. So under dispute resolution, parents may challenge the IEP team's decision. They can do it through mediation. They can do it through initiating due process. If due process is filed, there has to be what's called a resolution meeting, unless both parties waive the meeting or they participate in mediation. The parents also have a right to file a complaint with the State Department of Education. Now, under Maryland law, you'll see that the parent files that due process complaint with the Office of Administrative Hearings, which is an independent state agency tasked by the Maryland State Department of Education to hear special education cases. And during that hearing, the student remains in the last approved placement or last approved educational location until the hearing is completed so that the student isn't being disruptive. And then COMAR also, on the next slide, will echo the same thing in terms of a parent has a due process right regarding the identification, evaluation, educational placement, the provision of FAPE, which really means the implementation of the services. Are we doing them appropriately? Are we providing them with fidelity? So if a student has a reading disability and we say, we're going to deliver Orton Gillingham, are we doing that with fidelity each day for whatever period of time is required? And the due process complaint shall be made in writing, both to the school system and to the Office of Administrative Hearings. So the board policy doesn't address due process hearings because under the state law, federal law, and the regulations, those hearings go to the separate public agency. Baltimore County does encourage parents, though, to resolve the complaints prior to implementing due process by contacting the Office of Special Ed when a disagreement arises. The informal process is not required by IDEA, but it's really intended to maintain the relationship with the parent and to ensure the student receives the appropriate services and is placed in the appropriate environment without the necessity of filing a formal due process hearing. I know I covered that fairly quickly, but I knew that you guys were running a little behind. I'm certainly available to take any questions. And as you can see on the screen, I even included contact information if you need to contact me after the meeting. But I welcome any questions or comments at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Coles. That was very helpful. And board members, if you have questions, raise your hand icon and I will call on you. And we'll just be mindful of the time. Ms. Rowe.
Mr. Coles, thank you for that presentation. My question is, there are different, ideally this works exactly the way you say, but there are different times where parents or constituents will contact me as a board member and say that, well, this isn't working or that's not working. And the best I have to tell them is that the Board of Education does not hear special education appeals. And many of these situations come to my attention. Is it appropriate to have them contact you? Because sometimes they've already contacted the special education office, and in some cases it sounds like they don't understand what's happening with their child, but in other cases it sounds like the process that you're describing hasn't happened the way that you're describing it. Is that appropriate?
Well, Ms. Rowe, there's two things going on. If a parent has a disagreement with the IEP team decision and they'd like to file for mediation or they'd like to file for a hearing, they certainly can contact our office. We won't provide them with legal advice as to what to do, but we will walk them through what the different options are in terms of the procedural safeguards. So mediation does not require an attorney. It's really just a conversation between the parent and representatives of the school system, along with a third party who facilitates that discussion. And a parent can do that regarding any team decision along the way. The other thing is, if a parent reaches out to us and says, hey, we're not sure we want to file for mediation or due process, our office will follow up with the Department of Special Ed and request that they reach out to the parent and take a look at this case to make sure if something has been done inappropriately, that we address it before it has to become a formal complaint or a formal mediation. So in general, the parent really should be going through the Department of Special Ed, but if they aren't getting relief there, the next step is our office for whether it's mediation, due process, or the procedural safeguards, which includes the information about how to file a state complaint.
Okay, and the only other question I have that comes up frequently with parents is, what happens in a situation where there's a student in a classroom who the school system feels needs special education services, but the parents of the student are refusing or whatever, and that child remains in the classroom, but then other students are impacted? What options do we have?
Well, if it's an initial evaluation and initial provision of special ed services, our options are limited when it's the parent declining to accept the IEP when it's the initial provision. We cannot go to mediation and we cannot go to due process if it's the initial consent request. However, that student is treated as a general education student, so all of the discipline avenues that are available for other general education students are appropriate to be used with this student whose parent has declined special ed services. They don't have the protections under IDEA if they decline to allow us to provide the services. It's not necessarily a good outcome for the student, but it is something that school staff can use if necessary.
So if a student is being disciplined for something that would otherwise be a manifestation of their disability, and that's impacting their education, is that something that's reported to social services?
Well, that would be up to the individual school and the CPS liaison and the principal if they believe it is neglectful in how the student is being treated regarding their education. But that is something that we've talked with school counselors about, social workers about, and school administration in the past. Those are options that we have. In general, if the kid is coming to school, however, and is healthy and well cared for, CPS is really not going to do a whole lot with it. But we often will ask schools if they want to hold a mediation with a family who's declined services, because maybe there's something they're not understanding, and if we have a third party there and it's being explained by people outside of the actual schoolhouse, they may change their mind and agree to the provision of services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Pasteur?
I just want to take this time, Mr. Coles, to say that because of you and partially my IEP chair, I was a better principal and advocate for my children, because both at what's now Northwest Academy and Randallstown, because we had so many children with special needs. I've learned so much, and I've never said that to you. So this is my chance.
Well,
thank you. And I do that for the children that I better served, because you are everything Ms. Howie said, and a popsicle.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other board members, any questions for Mr. Coles? And So it is 6:40 and our meeting was scheduled to end at 6:30. So first, I would just like to say if there are any additional questions for Mr. Coles and or for our other presentation on curriculum and instruction, to please email them, but also to email, include Patty Clark, Ms. Howie, and me, so that we can keep track of that in terms of other presentations or other information that is provided to the full committee and to the full board. So thank you very much, Mr. Coles.
You're welcome.
And board members, in the interest of time, I would like to make a motion that we move consideration of policy 8311, which was item 3, and item 4, which is the May 19th, 2020 board resolution waiver of policy, to the next policy review committee meeting. Is there a second?
Second, Offerman.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I would just like to know, because I had made a motion. This is Makita Scott. Would that motion move to the next meeting, or how does that work?
So your motion to amend is a subsidiary motion that's inferior to the motion to postpone to a definite time, but it goes as a package, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pescher, did you have a question? Is your hand up from the prior presentation? Ms. Pescher? Okay, I guess she doesn't have a question. Hearing no other questions, may I have a vote?
Yes, Mr. Mahomza? Mr. Offerman?
Yes.
Ms. Rowe?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mrs. Causey?
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion carries.
Excuse me, Ms. Causey?
Yes.
I actually have a question about this being on our next agenda, and maybe this would be a question for Ms. Howie. If I have suggestions that I would like to make, should I send those over in an email, or should I wait till the next meeting and bring those up then as motions?
An email in advance of the meeting will be very helpful.
Thank you.
Especially if Ms. Howie or other staff want to research it and then have any guidance available.
And it's also possible, depending on the nature of the amendment, to do an alternate policy, so that an alternate one that includes all of the suggestions that you have, so that people can see them, and that way it's easier to evaluate.
Yes,
I appreciate that explanation.
So board members, feel free to do that for any of the policies. So the last item on the agenda is item 10. The floor is open to the committee to discuss issues of concern or interest. I must emphasize it's not a time to conduct business, as there's not been a notice provided as required by the Open Meeting Act. So are there any issues of concern or interest? Ms. Rowe?
I just wanted to know, when we're sending emails with suggestions, who do we include in those emails? The entire committee, or just yourself and Ms. Howie?
Not the entire committee, because we don't want to do committee work in a full email. But if you send it to Ms. Clark, Ms. Howie, and me, then it'll get processed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Rowe. I appreciate it.
Any other board members? Okay, if there is no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.